right, we're going to get ready to start. Did everybody get a hot cup of coffee? The smart ones are over here in the sun. The diehards are over here in the shade. How many, just out of curiosity, how many of you are native Floridians? Woo! And you came out today? I shouldn't complain. I grew up in the Niagara Falls, Buffalo area. This is what would be considered a mild day, but I've been down here for over 30 years, so this is definitely not what I'm used to. Did everybody get their cheat sheet? Okay. We're going to just basically follow this, and just out of curiosity, how many of you are working with a landscaping that's an existing landscaping or a brand new landscape with nothing there, just the foundation of your house? So we've got a mixture. Good. All right. So I'll go ahead and get started. They can get their coffee and join us. The very first thing that you need to do when you're deciding to go ahead and start your landscaping is you need to analyze your site. You've got to figure out what you already have there, what you want to put there. I mean, if you're starting with a clean palette, your job's much, much easier. If you're working with a landscape that's existing, you've got to determine what's worth keeping and what's going to be eliminated. The first thing I always tell people is look at the bones of your landscaping. And by the bones of your landscaping, I'm talking about the big trees that are already there, the things that are going to be really, really hard to get rid of. So the next thing that you're going to do after you've determined, yes, I'm keeping that, no, I don't want that, yet we're going to improve on this. The next most important thing that you can do is to figure out where your utilities are. Indian River County offers a free service. You call 811. They will come out and mark your water, your electric, your cable. Have them do it. It doesn't cost you a thing except for a couple minutes of your time if you happen to live in a gated community and need to let them in. Otherwise, they will just send somebody out. They'll mark it with marking paint. You'll have 2 or 3 different colors in your lawn. It's not going to stay there permanently. As you cut the lawn, it goes and it fades with the rain. And because of that, the biggest thing I recommend you do is once your lines are in, take pictures of it so that you know where those lines are, because they're never going to move. They'll always be there. But your landscaping may change. Exactly. They charge you when you have to come back a second time, and they charge you if you break the lines, especially AT&T, and I believe last I heard AT&T, when you break a line, it's like $300 to have your line fixed, and it's almost a 2-week wait. So do it yourself a favor and find out where your utilities are before you start. They will not mark, just so you're aware of it, they will not mark where your sprinkler lines are. That's something they can't do. If you have a service that does your irrigation, you can ask them to mark it, and they will be happy to, because believe me, they don't want to come out and fix irrigation. So that is really important to make sure that you know where your utilities are. You've determined through your site analysis that you're going to keep some of the plants and you're going to get rid of some of the plants. Probably the biggest thing I can tell you about that, I'm trying to keep this from blowing away, is your existing plants that are there, you're not married to them unless they're a big tree. And then you're looking at having big equipment come in to remove it. Most plants in Florida have a 15 to 20 year lifespan. So if you're working on a landscape that's 10, 12 years old, and you're trying to decide whether I should keep it or get rid of it, think about the age of the plants. If you're only going to have another 3 or 4 years worth of good life in those plants, now's the time to get rid of it, because that way it will be in proportion with everything new that you're planting, and you're not going to have to go back in 5 years and do a fix-up. The plants. Your trees, I tend to tell people to keep your trees. I mean, you've already invested 10, 15 years into a tree, they live for 40 or 50 years. It's kind of, to me, it's kind of sacrilegious to take them out. Definitely with palms, yeah. Yeah. There are HOA and county regulations on what you can take out and what you can leave. So they, of course, are trying to push natives and things like that. So just keep in mind what you're doing. If you're having questions, you can always call your county agent and they can talk to you. This is something my husband has pounded into my head. Where is he? He's over there eating. The shovel is your friend. When you're doing your site analysis, take that shovel and go out and dig. Find out not so much what your soil is like, of course that's important, but find out where the roots are. Most people think a tree, palm tree grows straight up, doesn't have much of an overhead, so probably doesn't have very many roots. They do have a lot of roots, and they're really thick and dense. And depending upon the type of palm tree, they can start spreading. So use that shovel. Figure out how much work is going to be involved in digging up those old plants that you want to get rid of. You might find you want to keep them. No, and this is, especially on a day like today, this is really important. Know which way your landscaping that you're going to be doing, which way it faces. Is it getting a southern exposure, a northern exposure, a southwest exposure, which sometimes to me is the worst one. Because that's going to determine, number one, the type of plants that you use, how much irrigation you're going to need to use, and the growth patterns of your plants. Something that's in really heavy shade is not going to grow as quickly as something that's in full sun. And we see this a lot with people that have a house that's identical on each side, but one side's on the shade, one side's in the sun. The plants in the sun are always bigger and more full and just a little bit healthier than the ones in the shade. So you need to keep that in mind and pick plants that will tolerate sun or shade. Along with your north, south, east, and west, the other factors you really need to consider is, are you, like I said, sun, shade, salt? We're close enough to the ocean that if you're on the barrier island, you do have to consider whether in a big storm or a windy day, you're going to have salt blowing across the dunes and onto your landscape. And along with the salt, even if you're out west, and I know a lot of people that are out west complain about this, the wind factor. On a cold day like today, that wind coming across the openness of the western communities where they've stripped everything out is going to burn your plants. So you need to take all of that into consideration. So that's stage one. That's your site analysis. And you need to do this before you even think about what you're going to plant or anything else additional. Phase two is the fundamentals. You need to, I hate to see people rush into a landscape. You've got to live with this for 20 years. Take your time and enjoy the process. What are your goals for your landscaping? Are you trying to screen your front entry from nosy neighbors? Are you love it? Are you trying to create a walkway going into your front so it's more interesting? Are you trying to have an open sunny area because you've got a pool and you don't want it covered in shade? So you need to figure out what your goals are for your landscape. What are the physical limitations of your planting area? And this is important because none of us are able to just on a whim go and grab a backhoe and start in on our front yard. Is your landscape area flat? Completely flat where you don't have to worry about anything? Or like in Sebastian, a lot of the front yards come down on a really steep slope into the runoff areas. So you need to consider that because that will play a factor on how you landscape. Do you have existing pathways or driveways or patios? You've got to think about that when you're landscaping, because nobody wants to be digging up a patio to put in a tree. And the one thing that most people don't think about until they get a little note in their mailbox: are you complying with your HOA requirements? Because whether we like it or not, they're there. They're there for a reason. It can change from year to year according to who's on the board. So make sure before you start your landscaping, you talk to somebody and find out. They usually have a list of preferred plants that you can use. So get that information before you start. And do you have existing irrigation? Irrigation is fundamental for planting. And I get frustrated when somebody tells me, oh, I don't need to irrigate. I'm going to go out and water by hand. That's fine for about 2 or 3 weeks, or until July and August hit. You've got to provide the plants with the proper amount of water, especially in the first 6 months when they're taking hold. So make sure you've got your irrigation. If you don't have irrigation, plan to have it installed. You ready for the fun part? The fun part is picking out the plants, coming up with the design, having fun with just going to the nurseries and looking at the display of plants and saying, oh, I really like that. And that's fine. When you do that, oh, so he's got a dragonfly. That's good luck. When you go to the nursery, leave your pocketbook in the car the first time. At least unless you're really, really confident, because you're going to want to figure out what you like versus what will actually make it in your landscape. I've seen so many people that have, oh, I like this. I'm going to take it home, and they plant it, and then a year down the road, they've got something that's 5 times the size they planted, and they can't walk in their front door. So this is important to know these things and take the time to ask questions. I mean, Busy Bee's got excellent staff here. If you've got a question about a plant, how it grows, what it needs, they will answer it. And if they don't know the answer, they will find it for you. So to me, that's the fun part. I love finding out about the plants and how they're going to grow. And then I start thinking, okay, where would it look good and things like that. The other thing that's something to think about is, are you going to create a walkway? And walkways don't have to be pavers. They can be made out of stone. They can be made out of mulch, just a natural walkway through your planting area. Do you have a focal point in mind? Other than your front door, is there something that you want people to walk around the back of your yard and say, oh, wow, like maybe a big oak tree that's been there for years and you want to eliminate it and do something unusual underneath it with a bench or something? Figure out what your focal points are, what's important to you in your landscape. Is it more important to have a big, wide open area for the grandkids when they come down to visit? Patios, focal point. If it's not a focal point, add a few points of interest in your landscaping. It doesn't have to all be straight line, 1 or 2 layer hedging. You can add something interesting, an unusual tree or just a bright hibiscus tree to just take your interest away from the long linear lines. So that's the fun part. You're figuring out what plants you're going to use. You're figuring out your design. If you don't know how to do a design, you can have somebody come out. We do consultation. Get a piece of paper. Measure out the area that you're going to plant. Draw it down. There's all kinds of templates that you can buy that'll look like little palm trees and things, and you can draw them in and then color it. But it's important to know how much space you have versus, and this is really important, guys, how big the plants are going to be at maturity. You might plant 2 plants right here and all the way over here and think, oh my God, there's so much space in between them. I need to put a 3rd one there. when they grow full force, that third one is going to get choked out. So think long term. Think about what the maturity of the plant is going to be. If you want an instant effect, be aware you're going to have a little bit more maintenance because you're going to have to get in there and trim more often as those plants start really getting closer and closer and closer. Eventually, you might have to take out that third one. So just keep that in mind. So you've got your landscape plan, you've got the plants you want to use, you've got it on paper, you know how much area you have to work with. Now the work starts. Now you're going to get out there and take out the old plants and strip the sod and haul in the materials that you need to use. Things to think about at this point is your soil really bad? Do you need to add some peat moss or some topsoil because it's too sandy and it won't hold any water, or something like pine fines or something else to break up the marl, clayish soil that you find out west? Those are really important to think about at this stage because it's awful hard to add it after the plants are planted. Make sure you're ready to start. You figured out the soil amendments that you need to add. Make sure you got the right tools. It's really frustrating to try and dig, especially when you're working with existing plants, with a shovel that's got a dull edge. Or with, you need something a little bit stronger to move all that mulch away, even something as basic as a pitchfork. Make sure you've got your tools, that they're in good repair, and that you're ready to go. Check those shovel handles. Make sure they're not wobbly so that the first time you go to dig, they snap. So, just kind of make sure your tools and everything are ready for you to work with. You've selected your plants. Now make sure what you're buying is healthy. I never have any qualms here, but there are places, like if you go out to one of the box stores, those plants they're on consignment, so they will sit there and sit there and sit there until finally somebody says, okay, we don't want them anymore, and they'll take them back. But while they're sitting there, they are getting absolutely no care other than a splash of water. So check your plants. Check them to make sure they have a good green look, if that's what they're supposed to have, that they don't have any insects or disease. And don't be afraid, I got gloves on, I'm not going to do it. Don't be afraid to turn the plant over and pop that pot off and look and see if there's actually roots on there. You'll find, especially when you're dealing with annuals, in the beginning of the season, the growers are pushing the plants out before they're really rooted. Yes, they will do fine, they will grow, but you need to know what that root structure looks like so you know how much extra care they might need. Okay, you've got the right plants, you've picked them out, now you're ready to install. And this is where we get back to spacing. When you're ready to start, figure out what your bed line is. And a good trick for that is your garden hose. Take your garden hose, lay it out, what you think your bed line's going to look like according to your drawing. Tweak it. If you think it's too narrow, pull it out a little bit. Once your hose is in place the way you like it, get some landscape paint, just like what they use when they're marking your utility lines. Go ahead and just mark your line. Show where that bed line is. Roll up your hose and you're ready to go. Now you can strip your sod because you know right where the bed line was. You know where the plants are coming out. So that's got to be established because you don't want to have a bed that's too small or too big, because if you got one that's too big, you're going to either be doing one of two things. You're going to be adding a lot of extra mulch that you may not need, or you're going to be running back and buying more plants that you really don't need that are going to end up choking out your design. So now you're ready to start installing. You've got the bed cleared, the old landscape plants are out, the sod is removed, it's nice and smooth, you've added your soil amendments. Generally speaking, when you plant your landscape plants, or any plant, you don't want to plant them any deeper than what they are in the nursery pot. So if you look at this nursery pot, I don't know if y'all can see it, but there's a little bit of ledge about a quarter of an inch above the soil line. You want to make sure you plant that plant at the same level that it's in this pot. And a little trick that we do, if the soil's really bad and you haven't been able to add your soil amendments, plant it a tad higher. That will give you room for the mulch to go over it, and it won't choke it out. Don't plant it too deep. They'll rot. It's just nature's way. And that's cold. And if you're going to plant high for a reason, not just because you're lazy and don't want to dig that extra piece of shovel full of dirt out. It's important that the plants get a good start. Make sure when you plant, you're giving them a good fertilizer. We like Osmocote, or there's different palm fertilizers. Your fertilizer is going to depend upon your plant. If you're doing Ixoras and things like that, and I'm not going to go into a lot of fertilizer crap. If there is Ixoras and stuff like that, they need an acid-loving fertilizer. Palms have a specific fertilizer made for them. Tropicals have fertilizer made for them. And blooming plants have their own. So know what you're growing and give them the care that they're going to need to get a good start. So you've got your plants in place. They're planted properly. Now you're going to go in and you're going to put about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of mulch over the top of it. The mulch is for a couple of reasons. Number one, aesthetics. Everybody wants it to look nice. And there are so many different kinds of mulches out there. You could go crazy trying to figure it out. It doesn't have to just be pine bark or nuggets. You can use gravel. You can do pine needles. The list just goes on. And you want to put that at the right depth. I tend to, I don't like the gravel to go on too thick. You want it enough to cover and anticipate some sinkage. But if it goes too thick, then you're going to kind of choke out the plants. That's a lot. And if you're using gravel, kind of be aware you're married to it. It will always be there. It will sink into the soil. And then when you decide, I'm tired of this, I want to try something different, the first time you go to shovel up the old stuff, you'll find all kinds of gravel. So it's always there. As long as you're putting it at the right levels, mulch, any kind of mulch will drain properly. That's, again, back to where you've made your soil the right way. So you're putting on your mulch. You've got your plants in line. Yes, I'm sorry. We have used preen in the past. I got to be honest, this is Florida. The first time the bird flies over or the wind picks up, they're sending the seeds all over. It's more a case of keeping up with it than anything else. I know some people are really opposed to Roundup, but it works. There's a couple of other ones that are more natural. I don't even know if it's Dr. Kushner's is even around anymore. But with anything, if you keep up with it, it won't get away from you. So your plants are installed. Your mulch is down. They've been fertilized. You're making sure you're getting enough water on them. Every day for the first week. And just like a baby, after that point, you start weaning them. Every other day for the next week. Every third day for the following week. Unless it has rained really heavy, then you can skip. Or we're in a drought in 90-degree weather. Then you're going to have to go out and supplement. And when you water in that kind of situation where it's really hot and the plants are stressed out, water in the evening or in the morning. And I always try and spray the foliage as well, because the plants will suck in water through their leaves. And it just gives them that little extra boost. If a plant's in a wilt because it got too dry, this is just a little side bit. Don't just water the soil, water the foliage, and that way it's going to absorb water both from the roots and from the foliage. It's just a little bit extra for them. All right, so we've got everything installed. Plants are all looking good. They're starting to grow. That was the work. Now the rewards. Now is when you do the extra touches. You're at your front door and it looks beautiful. You've got all this green shrubs, but you need a spot of color. That's when you add a nice pot on either side and fill it with color. That's when you add little statues into the landscape where you think you need just a little extra, just a little piece of fun. Yard art, wall decorations, fountains really should be planned at the stage of planning. But if you're going to add them, now would be a good time too, because you've gotten used to your landscape. I generally try to tell people to get used to their landscape if you're doing it yourself for a little bit, 1 or 2 weeks, and then you know where you need that little extra. You've determined that I don't go in my front door. I pull into the driveway and go in through the garage, and a pot by the garage would look much better than having 2 pots crowded at my front door. So little things like that. You get to know your own landscape and your own habits, your own travel and walkways. Showing off and keeping up with your hard work. Now's the time to have that dinner party where you can have everybody out on the patio and you can boast about how good everything looks. Now is a good time to, it sounds crazy, take your pictures of your new landscape, enjoy it, post it on Facebook or wherever. And it's nice to have those instant pictures of when it was installed versus 6 months from now. And you can really see how fast things grow, and you get a better vision of what it's going to look like 2 or 3 years down the road. Hard work and rewards kind of go hand in hand. You've got to keep up with what you've done, what we were just talking about. You can't plant it all and say, oh, it's perfect, I don't have to do anything, and walk away from it, and then 3 or 4 weeks come back and say, oh my God, what happened? The weeds in Florida are like vultures. They come in. It's a jungle out there. You got to keep up with that. New plants that are planted are going to sprout out odd shoots. This is the time to make sure you're keeping the shape of your plant. If you see, a sprig that's 6 to 8 inches long that looks out of place, don't be afraid to cut it off, because you want to keep the shape of your plant. That's more important than having a long piece of new growth so you can say my plant's growing. You'd rather have it grow uniform and be beautiful, and in the long run, less work.